Why is tanking so scary? Are you afraid to die and wipe your group? Because then everyone will know it's your fault. You could always blame it on the healer, but how long will that last? Is there a way to make tanking more approachable, and how many more questions can I get away with? Tell me if this sounds familiar. I want to tank, but I have no idea what I'm doing. I will die, the group will wipe, and everyone is going to call me bad, a dumbass, this stupid tank, and kick me from the group. Or we are missing a tank. I could swap, but I'm bad at it. Might as well wait for someone else to do it. Or the mole on your butt got bigger again. Make sure you visit a dermatologist. Love you, sweetie. P.S. Stop making the kids farm your super blooms before they finish their homework. If you have never played a tank before, or did and gave up because it was too much, chances are you have tanking anxiety. Or maybe not. Maybe the way you have to tank nowadays with boss positionings and Laradar charging you into the flame and killing you every time is off-putting. And it probably really sucks to have to know dungeon routes for every dungeon. One for fortified weeks, one for tyrannical, and one fucking route for those flowers and abominations in Everbloom. But what likely sucks the most is that you did play a tank. You went in already, talent build proper, good eye level, rotation remembered, charged in a pack in a dungeon, and before you could press your third button, you died. The healer and DPS people hit you with that tank, what the fuck are you doing line that we know so well. The truth is actually pretty boring, and you did hear it before. Just play more and you'll get better. Man, how many times did you hear this about everything? And why doesn't this help at all? Well, likely because when you hop behind the wheel of a tanking spec, you are thinking of I need to go in and aggro everything so my DPS won't die, but if I aggro everything I won't have my mitigation up and the caster over there needs to be interrupted. I'll press a big defensive first, but then won't have it for when they all gather up and start hitting me. Gotta make sure I have enough rage. Is my stuff on cooldown? The patrol is really close. Should I pull them back a bit more? If I turn too fast, the frontal cones will hit the demon hunter again. Never mind, he charged into it and already died. Oh, he's not releasing it. Maybe because he is typing and oh, yep, there we go. Called me stupid for pointing the pack towards the DPS and he left the key. Damn it. I'm just gonna get back to my rogue. Joe Rogan. You are always waiting for me with your blood-soaked sword and poison cake dagger. Always there for me on my desktop. I bet this is how all of our other patrons feel like with their 4K wallpapers of their characters and transmog. Let's be honest, YouTube for WoW content isn't that great right now, and these videos are made possible by our Patreons. Part of the deal are the wallpapers, sure, but you are actually supporting the content and we are super grateful for it. On top of that, there are other things you can get by becoming a Patreon. Head on over to patreon.com/MarcelianOnline and check it out. You don't have to do anything and it takes less than 26 seconds. You would be making some nerds really happy over here. That dungeon scenario has counterparts in raiding as well, where sometimes you just don't know why your HP just yo-yos all the time, and maybe you do know because you studied the mechanics but the other tank isn't taunting, or the healers are expecting you to survive through everything. On the surface, the solution just seems to be revolved around playing more, and that is true, but just repeating the same mistake in 28 dungeons instead of 2 won't solve the problem. The truth is, tanking has some more nuanced aspect to it that not a lot of players know or talk about, that makes the role feel so different from DPS and healing, mostly because if you get something wrong and you die, everyone dies, making the stakes way higher and the pressure just as high. In the end, the difficulty in overcoming anxiety, or maybe just a reluctance to take up the mantle, will be different for everyone, but I am here to let you know that I know what you're going through because I was there as well. I, and probably every other tank out there, have gone through situations like these. Back in Warlords of Draenor, I was actually kicked from a group for not being good enough to finish a dungeon. And I wasn't just kicked by pugs, but by my actual friends, which stung even more. And I was indeed bad, and the whole situation made me reluctant to tank again for the rest of the expansion. But my love for tanking has never waned and only got stronger. I eventually became the kind of player that can play all tanks in relatively difficult content, stuff like heroic raids and plus 20 keys. Here are a few things that I learned and reapply every time a tank spec is reworked and I have to relearn it again from scratch. Resources are the most important thing. Knowing how to generate your resource will make you a way better tank. Every tank has their own resource economy. Warriors and bears have rage, Paladin has holy power, Death Knight has runic power, Demon Hunter has fury and souls, while Brewmaster uses brews for different effects. Managing these resources properly will unsurprisingly create situations where you have a lot of options, and this will take away some anxiety on your end. For warriors, knowing how to manage rage will give you more rage to spend and then options to spend it on shield block and ignore pain for damage mitigation or revenge for DPS so you can build and keep aggro. A quick tip here, if there is one thing to take away from this is to always make sure you can cast Shield Slam. If you remember this to be the most important part, then everything else will make sense and you will understand your spec better. If Shield Slam is the most important and I cannot cast it, then I need to make it so that I can. For Warrior, that means resetting its cooldown via Thunderclap and Revenge mostly. Execute does this as well. That way I can have enough rage to mitigate more damage or deal even more damage. By just remembering this one rule, you already have your rotation down and all that's left is to press cooldowns. DPS wants to build aggro and kill stuff, and defensive wants to not die. This applies to all other tanks. For bears, Mangle and Thrash are the most important. These cannot be reset, but they have a short cooldown and are 2. If you play Galactic Guardian, then Moonfire procs also fit here since they generate rage, so you have 3 abilities now. Once you have enough rage, you can spend it on Iron First to become literally armor capped, or Maul and Raise for damage and damage mitigation with certain talents. Death Knights are probably the best example to understand here, since their only resource spending ability is Death Strike, which is their only actual active mitigation ability and the DPS ability at the same time. Blood is actually simpler than people think, and that's the main issue. You think too much about it and you miss what's important. Heart Strike. Heart Strike is your biggest runic power generator. In AoE, if you have Death and Decay down, you generate even more runic power. Of course, you have Marrow Rend to generate Bone Shields as more passive tankiness, but as long as you have Bone Shields up, all you care about is making sure you have the most amount of runic power, because you can survive anything if 2 conditions are met. 1, you don't get one shot, and 2, you have enough runic power to instantly death strike when you take a lot of damage. The one-shot thing isn't even relevant since that applies to all tanks, so really you only need one thing to be immortal: runic power. Obviously you have bone shields, defensives, blood boils for AoE aggro and so on, but those are less important since it doesn't matter how many cooldowns you have if you don't have enough runic power for death strikes. Vengeance is similar to blood with souls and fury, but it gets slightly more complicated since those are not as sufficient as a death strike is. And if you understand Vengeance, you can play any other tank as well. As far as resources are concerned, Vengeance uses Fury and Soul Fragments to deal damage and heal itself. Both of these are generated primarily with Fracture. Keeping Fracture on cooldown and not capping on the 2 resources it generates will be the most important thing you do as Vengeance Demon Hunter. The resources will be spent mostly on Spirit Bomb and Soul Cleave. They both consume both resources and do similar things. Spirit Bomb is more important, however, but if you remember that these are your resource spenders, you'll be way more ahead than any other beginner Vengeance. Paladin has Holy Power and Consecration. Holy Power is very straightforward. It gives you Shield of the Righteous, mainly, which is your damage and mitigation for all situations, but also Words of Glory to heal if needed. Keeping Judgment and Hammer of Righteous on cooldown is how you make sure your holy power generation does not drop. Yes, this is more important than spending holy power as far as I'm concerned. And I don't mean to overcap on holy power because Judgment is available, but rather to not instantly spend holy power when you have enough, instead of pressing that Judgment to generate more than you need in the moment. What this means is that if you have 3 holy power to spend and you can cast Judgment, it will be a better better habit to learn to press Judgment instead of Shield of the Righteous. That way you always maximize the generation of holy power, which in turn will end up giving you more shields to cast. Lastly, Brewmaster is a bit less straightforward, kind of like the polar opposite of Blood in this sense. Brewmaster's resource are its brews, and having brews available means you have options available. Options to deal damage, options to mitigate damage, and options to negate damage. Brews are available by default, but as you use them, they incur cooldown, which can be reduced by playing your abilities right. Those abilities are Tiger Palm and Keg Smash, which reduce the remaining cooldown of your brews. The brews you want to remember always are Purifying Brew and Celestial Brew. Your mitigation is Stagger, and you have that as a passive, which is stronger when you're just doing your regular rotation. Think of Stagger as damage you owe to take to the face, but you use Purifying Brew to delete that damage, essentially deleting your debt. Wish we could do this for banks. Oh well. Celestial Brew is a big absorb shield, like really big. Likely the biggest in the game, which of course negates damage that you would otherwise take. It's easy to play Brewmaster and get lost in its plethora of buttons and find yourself with no brews to press, your stagger bar is full and your HP keeps dipping down, eventually killing you. If you understand the concept of resource, then you put yourself in a position where you can learn everything else, since now you have the options to deal with anything coming your way. There are two more things that will 100% get rid of any remaining tanking fright you have, so long as you understand them, and I will be super quick mentioning them for each tank. I mentioned this already and you probably know it anyway, but mitigation, understanding how it works and what damage it counters, will drastically improve your gameplay. It's not enough to know what your mitigation is and have enough of it to use, but if you don't know how it works, you might still be surprised at dying. Think of mitigation as two types, active mitigation and defensive cooldowns. Defensive cooldowns being usually flat damage reduction buttons that are pretty straightforward. Vengeance has to rotate its defensives, which is currently Demon Spikes as your active mitigation, Meta from Fell Devastation or from the actual meta cooldown, and Fiery Brand. Vengeance will likely never have 100% uptime on its active mitigation like other tanks do, so if you often die as Vengeance, it will likely be because you dropped your overall defensives. So normally you want to Demon Spikes up as much as possible. When you eventually run out of charges for them, you go into meta, or rather, you go into meta and you stop spamming Demon Spikes and give them time to recharge. Fiery Brand can be used if none of the above are available, especially if you are in AoE and play the Fiery Brand spread talent to make sure more enemies deal 40% less damage to you. The current build of Vengeance also uses Fire Sigil to provide you with tankiness through the tier set and the Illuminated Sigil talent. As with all tanks, if you are playing your resource and rotating your defensives properly and still cannot survive, you can start stacking them. Also true with almost all tanks is that your active mitigation only works on physical attacks. For Vengeance, you have Parry from your Demon Spikes, which negates physical attacks completely, but you cannot do it for all of them. Paladins and Bears gain armor with theirs, so it's always there, but you reduce the damage of physical attacks instead of negating them. Paladins can block damage from physical attacks on top of their armor benefits, and they can also block spell damage to an extent, making them take less magic damage than other tanks. Prot Warriors block only works on physical attacks, but way better, making it the tank that takes the least amount of melee damage in the game. Bear only has armor from Iron Fur and the occasional heal from Frenzied Regeneration. However, Bear can have the max armor allowed for a tank, has a lot of health, passive healing, and short cooldown defensives to keep itself alive. Blood has some armor from its bone shields, but other than that takes all the damage to the face, physical and magical alike, and heals it back up. Healing it up with Death Strike gives Blood an absorb shield that absorbs physical damage, however. Monk is similar, where it takes all the damage to the face and deletes it from the stagger pool. However, stagger isn't as good against magical as it is for physical, so you will still eat up more damage from a magical attack than from a physical one. Now, of course, there's more to this, but we won't go into all of it because this is not a guide, and we don't want to stay here for like 2 hours and not actually go out there and tank some dungeons and raids. But we are going to move to aggro, which is the last big thing you need to know that may cause a lot of people to second guess picking up a tank. Losing aggro in a fight and killing your DPS players as a result sucks. Plus, we know that sometimes DPS players don't care how quickly the tank pulls, how many targets they pull, and just pop their nukes the second the fight begins. Like immediately, stealing all the aggro. I have also seen tanks pull in ways I personally consider wrong, resulting in them inevitably losing aggro or forcing their DPS to have to wait for a long time before they can engage in combat. That first of all sucks for DPS, since it's silly to say to a player to not play the game because you are too bad at building aggro. But don't worry, we are all bad until we stop being bad. In raids, there is only one rule I follow. Always pull with taunt and whatever your ability is. I have seen tanks charge in and do one ability for the damage and then just start doing their thing and losing threat to a red paladin, rogue, havoc, and so on. There's no excuse to not pull with taunt, since taunt is essentially infinite threat for its duration. Yes, only for its duration. The other part of this is that some tanks forget how taunting actually works. Taunt gives them the accumulated threat from the previous target, which is 0 if you just taunted a boss, so building threat is the next thing you want to do. Additionally, taunt accelerates your threat build-up for 3 seconds, so using an ability just after taunting will make it more effective, and if anything, required. Other than the pool, save taunt for taunt swaps with your off tank. In dungeons, it depends on your spec. The one thing that triggers my OCD is when tanks approach a pack and hit one target or body pull and then move to another pack. This is, in my opinion, the worst way to pull a group of enemies. You are not building any threat on any of the other targets, assuming you hit at least one, and it's literally impossible for your party to have 0 threat unless they just stand still or have their hands off their keyboards, which is stupid. And if you want to bet the success of the encounter on people pressing 0 buttons for however long it takes you to build aggro on all of the enemies, good luck. Not to mention, this is all assuming you can pull multiple enemies and require 0 healing, because the second the healer has to heal you, he or she instantly snaps aggro away from you. And whether it is the healer or a DPS, there are plenty of specs that need to start their combat slow, with a hot or a dot, since they cannot insta-heal or insta-DPS whenever you are ready. So telling them to not do it severely impacts their value in your group and over the course of a dungeon, the strength of your group entirely. As such, when you pull, adapt your pulls for your spec and the size of the pack and also your party composition. As a warrior, charge in for that initial rage, thunderclap the whole pack for AoE damage and bleeds, and if you have Giga Pumpers, use a revenge and then move to the next pack. With bear, charge in or moonfire target, use a thrash or 2, then move to the other pack. With Death Knight, you'll most of the time use a marrow rend to make sure you don't drop your bone shields, but always add a blood boil at the very least. Paladins usually pull with Judgment and Avenging Shield to hit all targets. And yeah, don't move to the other pack until you have hit all of the targets. Vengeance jumps in, uses Immolation Aura or Fire Sigil. Brewmaster can throw a Keg Smash and roll in with a Spinning Crane Kick, since Keg Smash sometimes doesn't hit everything. 2 more things. Always adjust the number of attacks you do before you pull more based on your party's burst capability. Using 1 Thunderclap per pack will not give you unlimited aggro there, but depending on how fast you are and how little instant burst your group has, it will be enough for a few seconds. Same with other tanks. Also, quick bonus to never die again going into a pack. If I see another paladin walk to a pack, start using Judgment and Consecration and dip to 20% HP in the first second, I will drink Battery Acid. In this case, the dumbass needs Holy Power for Shield of the Righteous, but it takes time to build Holy Power, and you cannot afford to take attacks naked. If you are playing a tank that needs a few buttons to press before it has enough resources to use for its mitigation, start the fight with a defensive cooldown. Go in with Ardent Defender if you are a paladin, Shield Wall as a warrior, Dancing Rune Weapon as Blood, Barkskin as Bear, Demon Spikes as Vengeance, and definitely Keg Smash as Brew, since Brew instantly gets its strong stagger aka shuffle from Keg Smash. All of these are just surface level stuff that too many people ignore. This video is not a guide on how to play these specs, but rather tips on how to correct whatever mistakes put you into a situation where tanking seems scary, or at least to take away the unknown of, but what if I die? I don't know if I can survive it. You can, and you have to, because WoW is not dead. Or is it? Click this link, because we covered something really surprising with the current player base. It exists.